Hello, thank you for coming listening to today's invited guest lecture. We're here to celebrate the International Day of People with Disability, which is celebrated on the 3rd of December since 1992. It was created by the United Nations, and it's an observed day aimed at increasing awareness and understanding and acceptance of people with disability. This year's theme is Transformative Solutions for Inclusive Development, the role of innovation in fueling an accessible and equitable world. Today, we're very lucky to have the pleasure of inviting Dr. Jill Duncan. She's a teacher, scholar, academic, and advisor who ensures that evidence underpins strategic direction, government policy, program implementation, and pedagogical practice in the education of students with special needs. She's been an executive director of the Cora Barkley Center for Deaf Children, head of graduate studies at Next Sense, director of the Victorian Deaf Education Institute, and currently a senior lecturer at in special and inclusive education, and leads the specialization of deaf studies and deaf education at the University of Newcastle. In 2020, she received the Excellence Award for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the University of Newcastle, chairs the Aussie Deaf Kids, and is a member of the NSW Disability Council. We're very excited to have you here today with us. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tracy, and it's a delight to be with you today. I appreciate the invitation, and I'm always excited to share my research with my colleagues. So as you can see, I am within the School of Education, College of Human and Social Futures, and I'm also working in equity, diversity, and inclusion in the academic divisions. I've got a couple of different roles. And I am Deputy Chair of the New South Wales Disability Council, as Tracy had mentioned. I am Editor-in-Chief of Deafness in Education International, and I have had the absolute privilege of working with Anne Porter as a non-executive director for Aussie Deaf Kids. Now, I think it's been 10 years since I've been on that board. So I absolutely acknowledge the First Nations people of this country, the Awabakal and Warami people, who are the traditional custodians and elders of the land on which I love, live, learn, and work. I seek to empower the social, economic, and political inclusion of all, irrespective of age, sex, disability, race, ethnicity, origin, religion, or economic status. Today, well, I have no conflicts of interest to declare, and today I will be sharing research with you that has been funded by the J&K Wonderland Foundation. This research will be published. The bottom one has already been published. The Punch and Duncan research has just been made available online, and our funding body has has removed the paywall. And so if you want to learn a little bit more about the research that I'll be discussing today, feel free to look for that research online. If you just search Punch and Duncan, you should be able to find it. And then we've had a second piece of research, which is actually the continuation of the first, accepted in the same journal. We are very excited, and that one will be available in the first issue of 2023, and that will be open access as well. And indeed, that first one, Duncan and Punch, is what I'll be referring to today. So the research that I'm going to describe to you today is about adolescents, young university students who are deaf or hard of hearing. But really, the findings can be applied to any young person with a disability more broadly. And so it was a qualitative study that we did, and we wanted to gain the perspective of deaf and hard of hearing young adults who were attending university in Australia. And what we did was investigate the role of social capital in assisting the deaf and hard of hearing students in the attainment of post-secondary education. So we know that it can be very difficult for young high school students to actually gain entry into university. And so we wanted to know, what was it that these deaf and hard of hearing university students did while they were in high school that allowed them access to university, enrollment in university. So we spoke with 10 deaf or hard of hearing university students who communicated primarily through spoken English, and we engaged them in a series of semi-structured interviews. This, what I'm reporting to you today, is the second of those interviews. So, in summary, we collected the data, we interviewed the students, and we completed a thematic analysis a la Brown and Clark, 2022 publications from Brown and Clark. You can find that detail in that published article that I mentioned. And we identified social capital facilitators around 4 ecological levels: the community, school, family, and individual. And I'm not actually going to talk about those today. Again, that's in that published article that is freely available to everyone. We also identified 2 barriers in our discussions with the students. Now, remember, we are looking at what is it that helped these university students who are deaf gain entry into university. And so we're going to just, I will talk about the barriers briefly, and then I'm going to provide you with our recommendations, and then it's up to you to fill in the blank or blanks with the other detail about this research. So let's start with the barriers, because I think it's always important to understand barriers. There were facilitators, like I said, but let's start with the barriers, because as practitioners who serve young people who are deaf or hard of hearing, we need to see, we need to understand, we need to apply what isn't working, or the learnings that we make from what isn't working, so that we can make it work, right? So participants, remember, these are 22-year-olds. Participants described being reluctant to appear different when they were in high school. Who's surprised at that? Not me. Because of their hearing loss. So they didn't want to seem different from their peers. And they had a very strong desire not to be treated differently by either peers or teachers. So, you know, when you're a young adolescent in high school, you really do want to be similar to the other adolescents. You don't want to appear to be different in general. Some, not true for every single adolescent, but in general. For some adolescents or some young adults, this included a reluctance to disclose that they had a hearing loss. We actually find non-disclosure of disability carries right through on into adulthood for across disabilities. So many people, regardless of their disability, have a strong desire, if possible, to hide their disability. Non-disclosure, and the non-disclosure of a disability can actually cause issues later on in employment. For example, if you don't disclose your disability, then it's difficult for the employer to make a workplace adjustment. So the university students said that in high school, they didn't want to tell anyone they had a hearing loss or were deaf or hard of hearing, and they just did not want to disclose it. They didn't want to appear different. For example, a student with a progressive hearing loss said, "I was afraid to talk about my hearing in front of people. I didn't want other people to know that I have a hearing problem." Interesting too that they framed it as a hearing problem. And so it was very much a deficit model for this particular person. Others refused available service, such as support from my itinerant teacher of the deaf in high school. This was actually a theme that came up time and time again. So the young adults were telling us that when they were in high school, they would refuse support. And, you know, one of the questions that we asked the young adults was, what would you tell a high school student? If you met a high school student who was deaf or hard of hearing, what would you say to that high school student? And so many of them said, take the support. When the support is offered to you, take the support. But the participants in our study refused support. Many of them refused support, not all of them. They had self-limiting thoughts. So several participants described the worries that they felt about their deafness being a potential obstacle to achieving after school. So they would think that, oh, I can't do this as a profession because I'm deaf. So for example, we had a participant who wanted to go in the medical field and was concerned that she or he, I shouldn't disclose, wouldn't be able to do their practicum in university because they had a hearing loss. And if they're in medicine, they need to be able to listen to the stethoscope, for example. So many of them had self-limiting thoughts. They felt they couldn't do this, that, or the other thing, and it really held them back. So one student spoke of having a lot of self-doubt at times because they didn't have any knowledge or discussion with people about what it was that they could achieve. And this comes up again a little bit later. Continuation of self-limiting thoughts. As well as self-limiting thoughts, some participants experienced limiting attitudes from other people. So you've got these young adults that limited their own thoughts in terms of what they could or couldn't achieve. And then they had other people telling them or discouraging them about what they could achieve because they had a hearing loss. One participant responded, I have been met with quite a lot of feedback that I could not teach with my hearing loss. So this participant wasn't the student that went into medicine, it was a student that wanted to be a teacher and was told you couldn't do teaching because you had a hearing loss. Okay, so there's much more detail in those articles that I explained or I mentioned early on. Let me get into recommendations, because recommendations are what you can do as a practitioner to change the trajectory of young adolescents so that it improves their likelihood of obtaining university entry, should that be what they choose. And so I'll go through these for you. Our recommendation is that schools promote in-person and online connections with deaf or hard of hearing peers and mentors. So this comes from, remember the question that I said to you, that I actually said to the young university deaf students, what would you tell a high school student that was deaf? And many of them responded, it is essential that adolescents who are deaf have deaf teenagers need to be with other deaf teenagers, and they need to have a relationship with deaf adults, either so deaf peers or deaf mentors. So interesting that this was a repeated phrase from our participants, not only in the first interview, but right throughout the interview process. Recommendation that schools promote self-acceptance and normalize deafness through open discussion and showcasing achievements of deaf people. So the normalization of deafness is very important. And I would suggest to you that the normalization of people with disabilities in general is a part of our diversity as a human race. Okay, so I think it's really important for practitioners to do that, to normalize the fact that having a disability is part of diversity, it's part of being human. And so these young deaf adults were saying, normalize it in high school, have people come into the high school who are deaf and famous. And so they were able to name a few deaf people in different careers that perhaps you could bring into the high school as a role model to show their peers that did not who were not deaf or hard of hearing, that it is absolutely possible for a deaf person to achieve at a high level. So a recommendation continuing that teachers explicitly teach deaf and hard of hearing adolescents about social capital and building social connections. So in those two articles that I explained to you, we actually give you a definition of social capital. And so just briefly, social capital is the benefit that people derive from relationships, either relationships with one other person, small group of people, or large group of people. So relationships that you can benefit from can be in a family, can be in a community, can be in a sporting club, can be at the school. And so there are ways to teach adolescents how to benefit from social capital. So we know that there are so many benefits of social capital. And with our deaf teenagers, we need to teach them. We need to be very explicit and teach them. Actually, a lot of adults would benefit from this as well, not just adolescents. Another recommendation is that teachers help deaf and hard of hearing adolescents understand a range of jobs available to them. And so what we say here is that career counseling is really important. And unfortunately, high schools that have career counselors are few. And so not every high school has a career counselor. And many classroom teachers in high school serve as a career counselor. But the school, the teacher needs to be really explicit so that they explain that there are a range of jobs that a deaf adult can do. And that there are a range of programs that the deaf or hard of hearing university student can enroll in. So that's essential for our kids. That the teacher help deaf and hard of hearing, deaf or hard of hearing adolescents understand their preferred personal workplace adjustments and help the adolescent know how to raise these adjustments with employers. So what this means is that typically people who have a disability need to have some type of adjustment in the workplace. So for me personally, with my hearing loss that has slowly become a bit more of a challenge for me, I really benefit from captions. And so it wasn't until a couple of years ago that I had to say to my employer, the University of Newcastle, I really need captions in order for me to understand online, because we were increasingly teaching online, I need captions to be the best employee that I can be. And so what you need to do is help the adolescents understand what their workplace adjustment is. So for example, we did have a couple of adolescents who tried, I talk a little bit later about the importance of any adolescent with a disability, but here we're talking about deaf kids. When they're in high school, it's really important for them to obtain part-time employment or volunteer work. And so we had a few young adults talk about when they were an adolescent in high school, tried to get a job in a restaurant, but the restaurant was too noisy for them. And hearing the customer, et cetera. And so what it was that they could do in the restaurant business or as an employee to facilitate their ability to hear. Anyway, workplace adjustments are really important. And actually, sometimes it's very difficult for adults with a disability to understand what their preferred adjustments are. And, the law actually says that it is the requirement of the employer to ensure that workplace adjustments are in place. Okay, let's go forward. That teachers help deaf adolescents understand how to navigate university disability or inclusion services in order to access necessary accommodation. So quite a few of our participants said to us that they didn't know that the university actually had an inclusion support or an accessibility support program that would help them in university to access the reasonable adjustments that they needed in order to do the best work possible while they were engaged as a student. And so the teachers really need to start working with the adolescents at a young age, saying, you know, when you get to university, look for this support, look for that support, and enroll, you know, take on those services that we talked about before, which the teenagers didn't want to take on. Recommendation that teachers teach deaf and hard of hearing adolescents, deaf or hard of hearing adolescents, self-advocacy skills applicable to social settings. You know, I think most practitioners in our field know what that means. For example, finding the place to sit in a group where you can hear, finding a quiet place where you can communicate, you know, avoiding certain situations where the hearing might not be as audible, or the signal may not be as audible as necessary for the adolescent who is deaf to be able to hear. So self-advocacy is really important. I think probably quite a few of our teachers are doing that already. So the more comprehensive, the more explicit self-advocacy skills are taught to the deaf or hard of hearing high schooler, the better, because then they get practice at doing that without assistance once they get to university. That parents connect deaf or hard of hearing adolescents with mentoring programs and deaf role models. So remember, I said that it was the teacher who needed to do that. I said that right at the beginning of the recommendations. But our participants said not only do teachers need to do it, so parents need to double down and make sure they look for mentoring services. And we in Australia have a service called Here For You, that mentors young people who are deaf or hard of hearing. And so many of our participants were engaged with Here For You and had brilliant things to say about that service. So it was putting allowing the deaf or hard of hearing adolescent the opportunity to both engage with a deaf peer and engage with a deaf mentor who is slightly older. And so our participants said, make the teachers do it, but make the parents do it too. So there's, you know, every opportunity to engage with that deaf connection. We call it deaf connection. Let's move on with parents, but parents and extended family. So not just parents, but also extended family openly discuss their personal early employment experiences with the deaf or hard of hearing adolescent as an example of navigating volunteer, highlighted that for a reason, and employment options. And so what our participants said, young adults said, they really liked it when their parents talked about when they were a teenager, what they did to obtain employment and how they struggled. But they also talked about their aunts, quite a few aunts, yeah, uncles too, but mostly aunts. You know, their aunts would talk to them about what happened to them as young people and how they gained experience in the sector. I put volunteer and highlight there so I won't forget to talk about it. So we know that also two options, right? Volunteer or employment. And some teenagers and their parents sort of don't really want their kids to engage in employment when they're in high school because they want them to focus on their studies. But the more the student, the adolescent with disability, excuse me, I need a drink. Hold on. Beg your pardon. The more the adolescent with a disability engages in employment or volunteer work in high school, the better off they are when they become adults. So employment and volunteer work is essential for maximizing I want to say maximizing success, but that's not a good phrase, for assisting the adolescent and the young adult to obtain beneficial employment, probably is a better way to say it. That parents and extended family members encourage and support the deaf or hard of hearing adolescent to obtain volunteer or work experience during high school. So interesting, because in Australia in year 10, most students do work experience. And in our discussions with these young adults, they said to us how important the year 10 work experience was for them. And in fact, a few of them suggested that there would be more than one opportunity. I mean, you talk to other kids in year 10 and some of them just do not like that work experience. But our deaf high school, our young deaf adults said that when they did the high school work experience, it was brilliant for them. So we need parents to talk about, parents and young family and extended family members to talk about the benefit of volunteer work and volunteering and getting work experience. So in summary, remembering that there's much more detail in the written text. Preparing for post-school really begins in the student's early in the student's high school experience, like year 7 or year 8, depending on when your high school starts. So you don't wait until year 10 to start your post school preparedness, if you will. So you have to start really early. So start talking to your year 7 deaf or hard of hearing students about social capital, about making connections and networks. Students with disability, students who are deaf or hard of hearing require access to a career counselor. It is so beneficial, or a teacher who specializes in career counseling if there is not a career counselor available. It is absolutely essential. I'm learning this more and more. It's something that I've only just realized. I mean, I've known it for a long time, but I've only just realized how important it is for our students that our deaf or hard of hearing adolescents, young people, need access to deaf mentors. It's so important for their well-being and to help them build their aspirations for post-school life. That you, as practitioners or parents, assist the young adolescent to join deaf-specific peer groups. Quite a few of our participants talked about deaf camps in New South Wales, although our participants came from all around Australia, but in New South Wales and other states as well. The schools will take the deaf students on a deaf camp. It's actually called a deaf camp. And these young adults, 20, 21, 22, I think 22 was the oldest, could have been 23, remembered back to their experiences in a deaf camp and said how brilliant that experience was. And there were a couple of participants who went in year 8, year 9, year 10, year 11, year 12. They looked forward all year to their experience in the deaf camps. So that was fascinating. That you encouraged your adolescents, your young people, to volunteer in high school. High school is tough. You've got to prepare for school leaving academically, but the volunteer work is important. And so is the work experience, even if it's a Saturday morning for 2 or 3 hours, because the adolescent is learning to engage with a variety of people in terms of wherever that work experience is. They're learning about what they're good at, what is challenging for them in terms of a job. They're learning how to negotiate auditory and communication barriers. So volunteer and work experience is essential, even if it's 2 or 3 hours a week, absolutely essential. Help your adolescent understand what type of workplace adjustment is required for them to maximize their success, and that it's okay. You know, requiring a workplace adjustment is part of life. It's that diversity, you know, thing that we were talking about. There's nothing wrong with requiring a workplace adjustment so that you can be your best self at work. And helping the adolescent understand self-advocacy skills, starting that, I'd start that from kindergarten if it was up to me. You know, self-advocacy skills are really essential for maximizing opportunities for all of us, really. And then working with the young person to establish a positive mindset. So as I mentioned early in the presentation, you know, a lot of our participants talked about self-limiting thoughts. So they have negative mindset. And so, you know, discussing the self-limiting thought with the student and then shifting that to a positive mindset. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to be easy. But I think as practitioners, we can make it a purposeful goal to do that. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share this research. I absolutely adore talking to young deaf people and understanding what it is that can help teenagers who are deaf. You can connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter, and those are my handles, I guess you call them. So thanks again for the opportunity to share my research with you. Please do go and read those articles and contact me if you would like some more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Duncan. I'm going to go definitely read the article. Very excited. And I think this was a perfect presentation to celebrate the International Day of People with Disability, because you highlighted the aim of increasing awareness and understanding of and acceptance with the self-doubt of the adolescents within themselves, but also awareness and understanding publicly. So the limiting attitudes from others and the reluctance to disclose. So I think it's perfect to start talking about raising awareness and understanding and acceptance. So thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate your time and expertise.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Tracy.
Yes.